Traffic mode in Woodland Road. That's probably fine. We're going to be on the other side. Sure. Thursday, good night.
astonished with the mere view of it. Therefore, when we hear mention made of the sacramental word, let us understand it of the promise which, being audibly and intelligibly preached by the minister, instructs the people in the meaning and tendency of this sign. Nor ought any attention to be paid to some who endeavour to oppose this by a dilemma which discovers more subtlety than solidity. They say, either we know that the word of God which precedes the sacrament is the true will of God, or we do not know it. If we know it, then we can learn nothing new from the sacrament which follows. If we do not know it, then we learn nothing new from the sacrament which follows. If we do not know it, neither shall we learn it from the sacrament, the virtue of which lies entirely in the word. Let it be concisely replied that the seals appended to charters, patents, and other public instruments are nothing taken by themselves, because they would be appended to no purpose if the parchment had nothing written upon it, and yet they nevertheless confirm and authenticate what is written on the instruments to which they are annexed. Nor can it be objected that this similitude has been recently invented by us, for it has been used by Paul himself, who calls circumcision a seal spargida, in a passage where he is professedly contending that circumcision did not constitute the righteousness of Abraham, but was a seal of that covenant in the faith of which he had already been justified. And what is there that would give any man much offence if we teach that the promise is sealed by the sacraments, which it is evident that among the promises themselves one is confirmed by another? For even according to its superior
Dispatch me after that.
translated from the support of faith. Now the sacraments bring us the clearest promises that the peculiarity of
There's a slight issue with the bed. The problem's been rectified. Any change of journal or call back. Always can be fixed. 13 seconds of commitment.
instruments that, while they both consist of the carnal elements of this world, the former cannot be fit to seal the promises of God, which are spiritual and eternal, as the latter are accustomed to be appended to seal the edicts of princes relative to frail and transitory things. For the believer, when the sacraments are placed before his eyes, does not confine himself to that carnal spectacle, but by those steps of analogy which I have indicated, rises in pious contemplation to the sublime mysteries which are concealed under the sacramental symbols. And since the Lord calls his promises covenants, and the sacraments seals of covenants, we may draw a similitude from the covenants of men. The ancients, in confirmation of their engagements, were accustomed to kill a sow, but what would have been the slaughter of a sow if it had not been accompanied and even preceded by some words? For sows were often slaughtered without any latent or sublime mystery. What is the contact of one man's right hand with that of another, since hands are not unfrequently joined in hostility? But when words of friendship and compact have preceded, the obligations of covenants are confirmed by such signs, notwithstanding they have been previously conceived, proposed, and determined in words. Sacraments, therefore, are exercises which increase and strengthen our faith in the word of God, and because we are corporeal, they are exhibited under corporeal symbols, to instruct us according to our dull capacities, and to lead us by the hand as so many young children. For this reason, Augustine calls a sacrament a visible word, because it represents the promises of God portrayed as a picture, and places before our eyes an image of them, in which every lineament is strikingly expressed. Other similitudes may also be adduced for the better elucidation of the nature of sacraments, as if we call them pillars of our faith, for as an edifice rests on its foundation, and yet from the addition of pillars placed under it receives an increase of stability, so faith rests on the word of God as its foundation, but when the sacraments are added to it as pillars, they bring with them an accession of strength. Or if we call them mirrors, in which we may contemplate the riches of grace which God imparts to us, for in the sacraments, as we have already observed, he manifests himself to us as far as our dullness is capable of knowing him, and testifies his benevolence and love towards us more expressly than he does by his word. Nor is there any force in their reasoning when they contend that the sacraments are not testimonies of the grace of God, because they are often administered to the wicked, who yet do not, in consequence of this, experience God to be more propitious to them, but rather procure to themselves more grievous condemnation. For by the same argument, neither would the gospel be a testimony of the grace of God, because it is heard by many who despise it, nor even Christ himself, who is seen and known by multitudes, of whom very few received him. A similar observation may be applied to royal edicts, for great numbers of people despise and deride that seal of authentication, notwithstanding they know that it proceeded from the monarch to confirm his will. Some utterly disregard it as a thing not relating to them. Others even hold it in execration, so After that, a survey of the correspondence of the two cases ought to produce greater approbation of the similitude which I have before. Therefore, it is that the Lord offers us his mercy and pledges his grace both in his holy word and in the sacraments. But it is not apprehended except by those who receive the word and sacraments with a certain faith. As the Father has offered and presented Christ to all for salvation, but he has not